Hi, everyone. It's Sarah Saxby of the Soul Rehab Project, and I'm so happy to be back for day two, back at the summit, very important summit. And I really appreciate being here. So thank you all for being here as well. And as I mentioned yesterday, my story over the 3 days of this summit is going to evolve. Yesterday, I spoke of more of like management from the position of living in a way that I was bracing myself for the Florida dropout. I lived my life waiting for something bad to happen and how much stress and pressure that puts on a nervous system. To today, which I'm going to talk about collapse. I spoke about yesterday how it was like I was living inside a prison, trying to regulate myself from inside the prison walls. And how I knew something had to change because my life was out of alignment. So today I'm going to talk about what I did to get myself back into alignment, what I had to go through and experience and face. And tomorrow I will talk about arriving in a state of presence where my system is regulated because of the work that I've done, because of being in a state of presence. So today I want to talk about the collapse and getting myself outside of the prison. And for those of you that heard the things I said yesterday, I was in a narcissistic relationship. I worked at an abusive job, had no break. My nervous system had no break. And my biggest fear was the floor dropping out from under me. So I spent a lifetime pretending I didn't hear things, didn't see things, allowing myself to be treated in ways that kept my life intact. I didn't want to have to blow up my life. So I would endure whatever I had to endure. So to risk blowing things up. And for whatever reason, I arrived at a place where I could no longer lie to myself. I could no longer abandon me. Why that happened to me, I don't know. And it's not like it just happened overnight, but something inside of me just could no longer live in a way where I could betray myself. And so things started to happen. And within my narcissistic relationship, I was there because it provided security, it provided stability. And I was always told that's the way. Doesn't matter what you're enduring on the outside, stability is number one. So although I was being abused every day of my life, I was stable, but I had to face that. And I did. And I left it, knowing that anything had to be better than living in an environment where I had no control, no autonomy. I had no past. I didn't have a past. It was erased. I wasn't allowed to talk about it. Wasn't allowed to think about it. Didn't matter what it was. And I missed me. And it was like, no matter how much therapy we had, no matter how much we talked to our spiritual teachers, the books we read, the retreats we went on, the workshops we took, the journaling, we tried all that. It wasn't helping. The only thing that I could do was leave that environment, and I did. And it wasn't easy, but I got out. I got a home for me and my children, not his, mine. And I went through a lot. I ended up in the emergency room a couple times because of the PTSD. It was wild. I was having nightmares where he was moving into the home that I bought on my own, and he wouldn't leave. So it was very stressful, and I had to figure things out once again, back on my own, which I always found myself here I go, back on my own again. Got to figure things out on my own. Have to be my own security, have to find my own stability. But I was still working the abusive job. So I started to do a meditation before I would go into this job. And I would speak out loud and I would just say, I know this isn't where I'm supposed to be. I know I'm here to do more than this. I'm not utilizing my gifts, my strengths. I'm shrinking myself to go in here every day. I know that. I'm aware of that. So please show me where I'm supposed to be. And I spoke those words to myself for about 3 months before I was inevitably fired. And mind you, I was always a good, obedient worker. I worked for 35 years. I started working when I was 15. And I was always showed up, always on time, always a great worker, never got written up. And here I was fired because I spoke up about the absolute threats and just nonsense that was going on behind the scenes within the hierarchy, right? And so I spoke up in a meeting and spoke my truth and spoke it loud. And I have no regrets. But I got fired. And they made up one thing and said that I did other things, but it's whatever. And so here I am on my own. I don't have a partner to fall back on. Certainly don't have child support to fall back on. Didn't have a job, didn't have an identity anymore. Who the hell am I? Once I don't have a job, once I don't have a partner, who am I? And so what I had tried to avoid for 50 years, I was experiencing. I had no floor, no net, no one. And I was trying to work with a spiritual teacher. I was trying to read books, trying to do things, going and getting energy work and all of these things that are great. But I felt like they couldn't reach me anymore. It's like I was screaming, going, no, it's not helping. And I'm just in this void. It was like I was just free falling in a void for I don't know how long. I had no structure, no money. What am I doing? And I would try to grip on to the bars of my prison and they were slippery and they were hot and I couldn't do it. And so I can't tell you how many moments, days, crying, screaming, punching pillows in a fetal position, going, what am I going to do? Gosh, it's still very, it's like, wow, I was in that position where my biggest fear was happening. I didn't have anybody to catch me. I had nothing to catch me. And no matter how hard I reached back to the prison and asked them to take me back as an inmate, they wouldn't. And I'm like, what? Screaming, what? What am I here to do? What am I supposed to be doing? And help me, help me, help me find something. Help me. Who am I? Because if you think about, if you're no longer a girlfriend, a wife, a worker, name your position. Who are you? And I just felt like I was carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. Yes, it was different though, because I was outside of the prison. I was outside of an abusive relationship, an abusive job. I was standing outside of it, sort of floating, but it was dark and it was endless. And so there was pressure and there was stress and I was crying and I was in a fetal position and I didn't know I didn't have anything to hold on to anymore. But at some point in time, I let it sit. I let myself feel it. because nothing was happening to me. If I stood back for a minute, yes, I'm in a void. Anyone outside still, in the prison, right? Anyone within the prison, which is where most people function, looking at me going, what the hell's up with this girl? Right? Why isn't she working? What is she doing all day? Why is she sitting by herself? Why isn't she posting on social media? And what happened? Probably look like a psychopath, right? Because I just fell into this space where my spiritual teacher that I'd been with for 10 years couldn't read me anymore. She was giving me advice that felt like it was for a person that no longer existed. She was telling me, offering guidance, and I was like, what? No. I was getting, I've gotten astrology readings from the same person for years, and I got one and she was saying things, and I said, what are you talking about? That's not me. Who are you talking to? That doesn't make any sense. And I was no longer, I felt like no one could help me. I felt like no one would understand where I was coming from, and friends that I had had before. It's like they weren't around anymore. And I didn't want anyone to ask, what's going on with you? How are you doing? Because I didn't know what to say. Because I was okay. But coming from a view inside the structure, inside a prison, it looked like I was insane. How did I get outside the prison, and how are you living outside of it? Because the prison has structure. You know what you're doing every day. You have an identity inside the prison. You have ways to regulate yourself. You have books to read and classes to take, and constant reaching for something outside of you to feel better, right? And I didn't feel like I needed to reach anymore. And it was the wildest place to be, but I had to sit with myself and say, wait a minute, am I okay? Because once you sit with the fear, I sat with it. Something I never did in the 50 years of my life, because I was constantly bracing. I mean, I'm surprised my shoulders aren't like up to here, because my entire life was bracing. My entire life I expected what? To what? I just expected the worst. And so I threw myself into the fire. I didn't wait for the fire to envelop me. I threw myself in the fire. I got myself fired. I knew that was going to happen. Are you kidding me? Did I think they were going to change because of what I said? No, hell no. I threw myself into the fire. And it was hot. I was outside the prison walls. I was outside of structure for the first time in my life. I was outside of my identity. And I sat there. It was burning, but I sat. And at some point, something inside of me calibrated, because I realized I was okay. I was okay. And once I realized that even though the floor wasn't there anymore and I was still here, I realized I was sitting in presence. And I would not have known that if I didn't come from a place of not being in presence. I came from a place of trying to feel better inside of my prison while I was misaligned in my life, lying to myself, betraying myself, abandoning who I really am in every area of my life. I was doing that. But it wasn't until I faced those things and looked at myself and said, I can no longer betray you. You are everything. I sat in the fire, let it burn me, and I recalibrated. So that's what I want to talk about tomorrow. I want to talk about what it feels like to live outside of that. Because it's like it's me regulated. It's me still in a stillness that I would have never gotten to if I was still living in misalignment. So thank you, everyone. I appreciate so much being here, and I look forward to seeing you all tomorrow.